Happy Friday, and welcome to MindShifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce. I'm your co-host, Michelle Pache, and I'm here today with Dr. Ryce and Dale Hoffman. We warmly welcome you to the show, and thank you for choosing to be with us. Today is February 7th, 2014. Our call-in number is 646-200-4169. Press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk with Dr. Ryce. We encourage you to call in with your comments or questions because then you actively strengthen and deepen your process. So now let's welcome Michael and Dale in the process of learning and practicing forgiveness.
Well, thank you, young lady, for that introduction. A couple of strange starts there, but what can you say? Technology. We certainly appreciate the technology that allows us to be in Bristol, Tennessee, and for Dale, I assume you're in Asheville, North Carolina, and for you, Michelle, to be in Michigan. And callers from all over the world able to talk to us all at the same time. It's pretty awesome. So we certainly appreciate the world of technology, and we appreciate the fact that you're with us and here to be part of absorbing the information of first century Aramaic forgiveness in particular, and putting it in a context is what Aramaic Fridays is about. And so we have the blessing of Dale Allen Hoffman, who last Friday announced that he'd be committing to a year of Aramaic Fridays with us. So Dale, we're delighted that you're here. Welcome. Is your mute button on, Dale? Good morning, Dale. Well, I hear some noises happening, but I'm not hearing from Dale yet.
Michael, I don't know if I recognize his number on the board yet. So
it's 828 number.
Yeah, he's not here. I got an 860 I mic'd, and Dr. Tim is 815.
Right. Well, it is Friday, so I'm sure he'll show up any minute. And so in the meantime, let's give a welcome to Dr. Tim. How do you be, good sir?
I'm doing beautifully, thank you. It's nice to be here. And don't worry, Michelle, we're not going to penalize you 10 seconds for beating the starting gun. But thank you for being here as well.
Dr. Tim,
go ahead.
I guess I'd rather be early than late.
Yep.
There you go.
I'm excited. It's been a while since I've done it, so you're right, I jumped the gun.
Well, it's just delightful to hear you on the call, and thank you for supporting us in that way. And we're here in a bright, sunny, bitter cold day in Northern Illinois, and just having a full day already. A full day.
Dale has joined us, Dr. Ryce.
Cool. Well, let's say hello to Dale and welcome the young man.
Hello. And I'm having a bright, sunny day here in northern New Jersey. So the snow everywhere. So I'm just outside of New York City. I've got a weekend retreat here with Dr. Albert LaChance this weekend, and it's going to be beautiful. A lot of snow, though.
Really? Well, I'm glad to be in Bristol, where it's probably in the 30s and clear, and I'm ready to head south. I'm ready to get out of Dodge.
For Florida?
No, actually Costa Rica.
Oh, well, it's even better.
If Rex is on the show, we talked, and we have a meeting on the work on the 20th, and I didn't realize when we talked that we're actually flying out on the 18th, so the 20th we may have to move back a few days if that works. In any event, what do you have on your mind today, Dale?
I've got nothing on my mind, nothing to remember, nothing to forget. Sorry, that's a Don McLean line. We said we were going to get into the second half of the Two Commandments today. I think that's what we talked about last week, sort of the second half of the... So maybe that's a good thing to have on my mind.
Yeah, especially the part, and the part we want to get into is commandment as we're told from the Greek says that we're supposed to love love God and neighbor as we love ourselves. And then the second part they have accurate. The first part's so far off base. We talked about that last Friday. Second part, for upon this hangs the law in all its profits.
Oh, absolutely.
The Aramaic is more properly rendered as maintain a condition of love in your mind called rachma, actually a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain and a gateway for human life to enter when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, in order to maintain your human life. And that this is the key. Upon this hangs the law and all the prophets. And I think I shared a little bit about that last week, but I know that when I first caught what that meant, when it struck me, I was so excited. This goes back probably 15 years ago in Laws of Living. And I got on the phone and I called about 200 years of religious experience. I'm talking about people that I knew in the religious life. You know, somebody who'd been a minister for 25 years, a rabbi for 10 years, a nun, a priest for 30 years, whatever. And with great enthusiasm and excitement, explained or expressed the delight I had at, upon this hangs the law and all the prophets, and asked them what that meant to them. And what I got from 200 years of religious life experience was, blah. So what? What's that got to do with anything? And for me, the excitement was recognizing that it is this filter active in the mind that allows us to maintain truth and a human life. And if we don't have that, then we can forget about reading the law and the prophets, because without that, the law and the prophets are meaningless. It all, the understanding, the true understanding, what's really meant, hangs upon that condition in the mind. Only through those brain cells can we see truly. And an example I use is the one of, that people often use to justify vengeance when they say, well, even Moses said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and people take that as permission to do vengeance, which when you put it in context and you see it through rachma, this filter in the frontal lobes of the brain, you don't see permission to do vengeance on anybody. What you see in context is Moses is dealing with a pretty vile and violent people who would do just huge retribution for the smallest offense. And so what Moses was doing, you see when you look at this through rachma, is he was saying, okay, if you have to have your vengeance, the most you can do, if they took out your eye, you can injure their eye. If they knocked out a tooth, you can knock out a tooth. But that's it. You can't go slaughter the whole family, which was kind of the habit of the time. So to me, it was a very exciting moment. I can remember physiologically the enthusiasm, the excitement of recognizing what that statement meant, that the whole understanding of it hangs on that first, and then you go back and you look at, for instance, the compilers, the translators, the directors of translation projects, and you look at the viciousness and violence with which they lived, even, so-called ministers. I mean, you look historically at the guy who headed up the translation of the King James Version of the Bible, and talk about vengeance-oriented, disproportionate, like all out of proportion with any kind of offense. Horrendous, horrific. Of course we have a vicious and violent translation of the Scriptures. You couldn't get anything else out of a mind that doesn't have rachma active. And so I'd love your perspective on that, Dale, and just some input from you in that direction.
Yeah, the two commandments, they're a little different in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The one you're referring to is in Matthew and Mattai, and you really hit it on the head. The most amazing thing or experience about what I do with the teaching is the aha moments, the moments when there's something that I may have been looking at for 2 decades, the same phrase over and over and over, and then either a little tiny piece of information or a bit of insight, that moment of revelation where I get it and it pops. And it's funny because Loretta will walk into the room and she'll know that I had a revelation because I'll have tears streaming down my face, but I'm laughing and there's my nose is running. I just have this overload of the senses because it just opens me wide, and I actually had one of those with this in the, of course, the word that is asked of Yeshua when it says literally that the scribe asked him and was testing him. He asked about what's the greatest of the mnemosa. And of course, mnemosa, that's a word of Greek origin, which that word mnemosa is a word that means basically an ordinance. It's not a law as in a natural law or a law that lives through you, but rather an ordinance or a fence or a framework to live within. In other words, do this, don't do that. Something about actions, a masculine thing, something that has to do with the physicality of your action. And it's funny because, and I've heard this from you for 2 decades, and it's the truth that Yeshua didn't reply with the greatest of the mnemosa. The word that's actually used at the end of Matthew 22:39 is that he replied with the greatest. He says, on this hangs the law and the prophets, and that's the thing is that word law, when he says that, is arita. Now, arita is, of course, a word you know very much about. The ta sound genders it feminine. What that means, it's not a commandment such as a physical law. It's not the physical laws that you live within in Aramaic would be, sometimes they would actually use the Greek word mnemosa, but usually it was the word puktana. In other words, do this and don't do that. The ta, though, in arita, genders it feminine, and the feminine means it's a state of being, to have. It's an active state of being. And then the aura sound, of course, is a sound that Aramaic borrowed from Coptic Egyptian, and aura means a shining light or a glow. It means a glowing light. And also where it says the prophets, that word prophet in Aramaic doesn't mean a soothsayer necessarily or someone that foresees the future. I think I mentioned this on it was either the last call or the one before. That word prophet in Aramaic is, in this case, is wanbeya, or nabiyat is another form of that word. And that word prophet doesn't mean someone that foresees the future. And all these things we have of these prophets today, what it actually meant is literally an open channel of God, someone who was open in that eternal flow, and that eternal flow was called the Arita. It was also called the Torah, not the written Torah written down on a page, but the Torah that lives through your heart. And another word that they would actually use for it, and I don't know if you know that or not, is milta, is another way that you can say Arita. It's the living manifestation law, the essence that lives through you. It's exactly the opposite of a do this and a don't do that. I say it all the time that his teachings were feminine, meaning they were about states of being. They were about perceptions. They were about ways of experiencing life. They were not about physical do this and don't do that. If you ever reference something physical, masculine, he would say, look, here's the physicality of it. If you feel like you need to do that, like go take your sacrifice to the altar, go and do it. But you still have to come back to the feminine aspect and process that within yourself. That's something that in Koine Greek couldn't take. There's just no way to translate it into Koine Greek, which even Greek scholars will admit that Koine is a very blunt, not very nuanced language. It was just very blunt and couldn't hold the kinds of nuances that any of the Semitic languages had. So that's from the Matthew version, is that ends with the law and the prophets. It's got nothing to do with about your actions. It's about your essence. It's about that, what we always say, the conscious, active, and present love, because that's the key to the whole thing.
So then it refers us back to doing the work of achieving a human life before you start trying to approach any project in the world. It first and foremost becomes this state of being, a human being. And, of course, for those who are new to the show, we always start the why is this happening to me again workshop out with the question of how many have ever held a newborn child. And invariably, everybody's answer when we ask people to describe the essence of the newborn, and it doesn't matter where in the world we are, we ask the question, describe the essence of the newborn, and everybody's word is some variation on the theme of love. Mm-hmm. And my input to people is, okay, so now we've established what human life is. And in essence, what Yeshua is saying with this is the first order of business in the law and the prophets is have a human life. get a human life first, because if you don't have that, the rest of it's a waste of time. And people who are living with viciousness and violence and words and thoughts of hostility and fear literally are not human. There's no presence of human life in the human-looking form that's filled with viciousness and violence. And you look at how that vicious and violent culture has taken over the world. It's so insane. It's so gross. I was saying on the show yesterday, I was visiting someone, some young people, and they were watching MTV. And these kids don't know what brain rot they're being fed. And is it any wonder that the kinds of things are happening in the youth world today? There's some awesome things happening too, but there's just so much degradation, so much drug use, and the brain rot they're being fed. I mean, this program is sat and watched, and I wouldn't even describe it. It was so coarse and gross. And yet these young people are just sitting like, this is normal entertainment. And human life is gone. And so to me, the whole idea of Yeshua's teaching was, let's get a human life first. And that's where he says this, for upon this hangs the law and the prophets.
And, you know, it really is. It's contained within that word aurita, because, of course, it has that aura in the beginning, which is a sound that's in Coptic Egyptian, it's in Aramaic, it's in Hebrew, it's in Greek. That same aura sound, it's that glowing. The way I liken it is that, let's say you're having an experience. A good way to do it is you're flying and you're landing. And when you land, your ears start getting a little bit, you start building up a little bit of pressure. And sometimes you kind of put your fingers over your nose and breathe slightly just to pressure out of your ears, and then all of a sudden it's almost like taking a blanket off of your ears. There's this depth and this presence. There's this this beautiful timbre where it's almost like everything that you're hearing wakes up, and you didn't even realize that you weren't getting the fullness of what was there until you woke up. And that's exactly what aurita is. It's when it happens, it's that presence, it's the revelation. You become your own personal prophet, that open channel of the infinite, and it's not until you wake up that you realize that you were ever asleep. It's not until there's actually in two plus decades of working in audio processing and packaging and recording and things of that nature, there's a processor in audio recording called a Sonic Maximizer. A company called BBE makes it. And it's amazing because you can listen to a song that just has the most amazing sound, and or an instrument. You can put it on, say, a guitar, plug it into an amplifier, put it on a guitar, and just set it at the halfway point in terms of its bandwidth, in terms of the intensity of the effect that it has. And you hit that button to turn it on, and all of a sudden it's like taking a blanket and lifting a blanket off of the speakers. There's all these fresh nuances. There's this fresh presence. There's all these frequencies, this openness that you didn't have before it was on. Whereas when you didn't have that maximizer, you didn't have this unit that brought presence in, you didn't realize that you weren't getting all the frequencies. You weren't realizing that you were picking up things on all these nuances and levels. You're not aware until you realize it, and then when you do, you hit that button. You hit the aurita button, you could say, the presence button, presence with a capital P. It's exactly what Eckhart Tolle talks about. And you're fully awake in that present moment, the aurita, that full presence. That's when you realize that you were asleep, and that's exactly what he's saying. And that's one of the things of us, the ones that are out there doing the teaching, we realize that unless people are willing to be fully present in the moment, they're only going to have basically a conceptual relationship with what we're saying. As an example, some people come to my events, and I do my best to always begin by saying, I want you to listen in a different way. Let go of what I'm saying with my words. I want you to pay more attention to the energy that you feel in your body. I want you to be able to just be fully present and feel what's going to happen over the next couple of hours. Let go of trying to understand what I'm saying, because just because you have a mental, intellectual understanding does not mean that you're going to have the energetic shift, or that state of presence, which is what's actually important. And still, because some people they have never related from a point of presence, they only relate from that sort of conceptual, like you would say, the digital mind. They only relate from that sampling of what's real, of the actuality of the situation. They're still hammered in on the words that I'm saying, and they'll have 1,000 questions, of course. And I can answer 999, and I can hit the 1,000th question, and they'll have 1,000 more. Because the one thing they won't do, that they haven't learned quite yet, is that state of presence. But here's the thing, when it does happen, that's when you realize, oh my God, here it's the same life. I'm living the same life in a lot of ways, but all of a sudden I'm breathing deeper, and all of a sudden I'm perceiving things that I never perceived before. I'm seeing and hearing like these beautiful nuances of presence that I didn't even realize I wasn't hearing until I woke up. And the Alrita is that moment it's the moment of presence. It's that being fully present in this moment. The Tuvehun, the Tuv from Tuvehun, blessed are in the Beatitudes. That Tuv means ripe. It means fully present. It means straight into the center of the bullseye. And until you have those full presence moments, you don't realize that you're actually asleep. So he's basically, the scribe is challenging him in these verses, and he's answering knowing that on some level the scribe has basically, most likely, no clue what he's even saying, because that guy wants to hear the greatest of the physical ordinances, and Yeshua is not talking about that. He's talking about the law that lives through you. It's a whole different level of being and understanding.
And I'm inclined to just offer that the greatest enemy to that state of being is hostility and fear. And so you look at the minds that go at the whole idea of the law and the prophets out of a fear-based mind. The first word out of their mouth, the first conversation is, in fact, this might be another thing for you to address from the Aramaic. We're told by the Greeks we're supposed to fear God. And I can't tell you, I've had maybe over the last 45 years, I've asked that question of several preachers. And to a number, they all say, it doesn't mean fear. It doesn't, no, we don't mean that. It's like, well, why are you using the word that means fear in a culture where fear is so rampant? And I never get an answer from them. You want to talk about the idea of the Greek translation being fear God and what it really means from the Aramaic?
Well, yeah, absolutely, and it's something I speak of quite a bit. The word, when we're told in Hebrew and Aramaic, fear God, that word is tevkol. And kul, at the end of the word tevkol, kul means whole. It means whole being or whole body, complete or whole. That tevkol is not that thing that we think of. The example I give, I think I gave it a couple of weeks ago on the show where I said that, let's say that there's a child and he's in a road, it's a busy street, he's running out into the road and there's a car coming. And the mother runs and darts toward that child and grabs the child and pulls him back right before the car gets to him. And the way I explain it to people, I ask a question. I say, well, what is it that she felt on the way toward the child? And I say, think about that. That's rhetorical. And then I'll say, what happens after? When does the fear happen? When does she feel the fear? And people say, oh, well, it comes after. The fear comes after the present moment. That feeling, when you're, like, let's put it this way, you're firing on all cylinders. The Alrita is moving through you, conscious, active, present love, and you're wide open. That's what's actually happening when she's going toward that child. And here's a real key that everybody may not quite pick up. Listen to the show a second or third time. Maybe you'll get it then. When she's running toward that child, that word in Aramaic, when she grabs the kid and pulls him back and keeps him from being hit, is the word chaya. Chaya is the word for, Yeshua said, I come to give you chaya, life. Chaya means literally conscious life energy. So what she's doing by pulling him back, she's saving him. But by saving, it doesn't mean necessarily just in the physical sense that she's saving his life, because he is life itself. It's not about the physicality of his life. It's the realization that she is fostering the eternal blossoming of chaya, of that conscious, active life through him by pulling him away from that thing that would have basically taken him down. And it's the same word as salvation. When you hear salvation, it's nothing to do with this modern Christian sense that's only a couple of 100 years old. that word salvation, again, means it's the same word, haya, conscious life energy, to be fully present in this moment, and that's the orita. And that TED call, of course, it's not a fear. What it actually is like, as an example, some aspect of it could be like fight or flight, and not in a fear sense. I would really offer that fight or flight is not fear. Fight or flight is the system coming to a point of entropy, to a point of an evolutionary moment of truth, and there's a lot of energy moving through the system. And when you're ramped up and you're wide open, that's a moment of presence. That's the moment of revelation, and you see options. You see your deeper aspects come into being when those moments happen. That's what it meant, be like that with God, be wide open, be in that wide open state of revelation. It wasn't a fear. The fear thing is insane, because just when you realize that in Aramaic and Hebrew, especially in Aramaic, Allah, that word God means absolute only being. How do you fear something of which you are? It doesn't even make sense. And again, I mean, that's the misunderstanding of what he was saying. And speaking of that, I'd love to, at some point in the call, we can touch on the second half of the two commandments from Mark and Luke as well, because they both have different endings than the one that's in Matthew, and I'd love to hit a couple of points from those too.
Cool. That's awesome. Let's go for it.
Cool. So, first of all, in Luke 10, Yeshua made that statement saying the second law that is like the first Dhamma, that's essence of the first, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And then the scribe says to him, okay, well, who's my neighbor? And Yeshua replies with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the thing that's beautiful about the parable of the Good Samaritan, first of all, a lot of people in modern times, unless maybe they've taken a theology course, don't even know what a Samaritan is. They think Samaritan means do-gooder. It's not quite what a Samaritan is. A Samaritan, if you actually read your Bible, you'll find out, and especially if you do cultural studies of the time, you find out that Samaritans were actually a microculture class of people that were pretty much beaten down and suppressed by the Jews at the time. And I don't necessarily mean just Jews as in Jewish or within Judaism. When you see that word Jew in the New Testament, most of the times it just means Judean. It doesn't mean one of the Jewish faith, although most were. And the thing that's so significant about the parable of the Good Samaritan is that Samaritan, here is a Jew on the road, and very sick, fallen to the side of the road, and other Jews keep walking by him and essentially ignoring him, and it's a Samaritan, the class that's been beaten down by the Jews, the class that's been ostracized, and one of those ones, much like some of the Aramaic speakers that they would call the swine or the pigs. It's actually a Samaritan that stops and nurses his wounds and gets him a place to stay for the night. So the Samaritan is actually a class, a subculture of people. In fact, it's not, and today it means sort of the Good Samaritan, the do-gooder, and people don't realize actually the backstory of that. And that's something that it's seeing beyond the classes, seeing beyond the races, seeing beyond the physicality of the situation, and realizing, again, coming from Rahma, from that state of conscious, active, present love. If he was coming from fear and hostility, he would have looked down on the Jew and say, oh, well, this guy's obviously a Jew. I'm just going to leave him there. I'm going to let him. And a lot of people did do that. But in fact, it was a Samaritan, one who this guy maybe had even, who knows, maybe he had even cut him down face to face in the past, and the man still stopped. It's about doing what's real, doing what's conscious, and coming from that place of presence, coming from the center, rather than looking what's outside, going back to the center, which is what that word repent means. Repent, tuvo in Aramaic, means to be fully right. It means to turn 180 degrees opposite. In other words, you're facing out in your life, and you actually flip your vision exactly 180 degrees so that you're focused in. And then, much like Yeshua said in the Gospel of Thomas, blessed is the one who takes their place in the beginning, for they will know the end and they will not taste death. In other words, they won't be unconscious in the world. They realize that they're projected into this world, though they are not of it. And it's a really deep place. So Luke is just slightly different it's a bit different from Matthew. And maybe you've got like a couple of, I'm sure you've got some insight that lends into that, and then a little while later we can get into what it says at the end of Mark as well, because there's some great insights there.
Oh, I think you're just right on there. Let's go ahead with Mark.
Okay. Well, what he says again in Mark, we've got the second commandment that he says is the essence of the first, Dhamma. And then he says let me give you a translation. There's no other commandment that is greater than these. And this is what's interesting. He says, I don't remember exactly what it says in the King James anymore because I don't really look at the book as much as I used to. Obviously, I don't really, I'm just not in that sort of frame of mind. But he says basically that there's only, what happens is, he says, there's only one. And this here is actually, let me say that, Yeshua said that there's no commandment that's greater than these, and then the scribe replies. This is the scribe saying, yes, there's only one God, and there's none other than he, is essentially what it says in the King James, which is interesting because Yeshua replies, and his reply is a little bit different. The scribe is essentially answering and saying that, yes, there's only one God, and there's no other God besides the one God. And Yeshua's reply in Aramaic is Lahoit Rakik Min Malkuta da Allah. Now, the thing that's so precious about this phrase is, first of all, one thing to understand is that word Allah, that word God. What he's saying here by using the word God is we have to understand that God in the first century in Judean Aramaic didn't mean one God that's somehow separate from anything else. That word Allah literally means absolute only being. In other words, what Yeshua replied with was, you are not far from the realm of Allah. Or another way of saying that word not far is you're threaded within God. He's saying essentially not there's only one God, but that there's only God. It's something you will not see in Greek. You won't see in the English translations coming from the Latin Vulgate or from Greek in either of them. They just didn't seem to understand that. It's a huge nuance, understanding that what Yeshua was saying is, all right, well, it's nice to think that there's only one God and there's none other than the one God, but Yeshua was basically saying, look, I'm not saying that there's only one God. I'm saying that there's only God. There's nothing outside of the one, and you are that one manifest right here within time and space. It's something that I would say, I don't know that I've even heard many modern ministers. I don't think they would even be able to comprehend that. And to me, that's the base of the Aramaic Jesus teachings. It's the realization that God is not something separate. God is everything. It's not God plus universe plus cosmos plus solar system plus people plus earth. God is the entire being. God is everything. Anything you can think of, anything you can dream of, anything that's physical, anything non-manifest, there's nothing outside of the one. And that's the absurdity of this modern thought of this, somehow there's one God that has power over others. And it's not physically possible. It's not theologically possible to somehow say, as an example, Jesus is the only Son of God. So somehow he's got all the magic and you can't have it. The entire system, the entire cosmos would collapse on itself if one atom or one electron had any more power than any other part of the system. Science says that the whole thing would collapse on itself. It never would have manifested in the first place. And, of course, if he's the only one, then, of course, what does that say about people that aren't? That means they can't ever become that because he's the only Son of God, which would, of course, have meant that he lied when he said, you can do all that I've done and even greater things. And I, of course, know that wasn't a lie.
I'm in full agreement. And, when you hear that statement, in him we live, move, and have our being, none is separate. And the specialty of the world is to make sure that we think of ourselves as separate, and we do that all with our own minds. And it's a return to our human lives that forgiveness empowers, because forgiveness removes the insanity. That's why it's the core tool.
It peels back the mask. It takes the veil off. That's the hypocrite. It's that mask. That digital like you say, it's many, many small samples of an actual direct experience. That's why it's the finger pointing at the moon, and Yeshua was talking about the moon. He wasn't talking about the finger pointing at it. He wasn't talking about, he was able to talk about it in concepts in terms of parables, etc., for people to pick it up at any level who had eyes that see and ears that hear. But, of course, when people can only look on the surface level, they can't get down deeper. And if they're not coming from that state of presence and they're not fully present in the moment, that conscious, active presence, love, it's one of those experiences where you're, speaking to someone and you see that it's going in one ear and just kind of drooling out the other side. And it's the thing that comes with experience for me as a teacher. After a while, I developed this realization that it's like once you have those experiences, whether it's in still point breathing or in doing the Aramaic forgiveness work, whatever it may be, just being fully open or spending time with a newborn baby, you lose your interest in trying to convince anybody anymore, and you start to realize that those times that you were trying to convince someone of some ideology that you have was basically the prime example that you were not coming from conscious, active, present love, and you were almost trying to convince yourself that the carbon copy was as good as the real thing, even though somewhere deep inside you knew that it wasn't the real experience. And, of course, Yeshua, the Arlita, and what he's speaking of here, he's talking about the direct experience itself, not the finger pointing at the moon.
And the gift of forgiveness for those who do it. And, of course, the biggest threat to the non-being self and the non-being mind is to forgive, because when we forgive, we collapse what we're not, what we've been taught we are. So the world attempts to teach us all kinds of things. And you remember they said, do not be molded by the world or you'll end up moldy. Isn't that how it went in Aramaic?
It's a little different, I think.
But that's the essential message. If we buy into the world's thoughts and beliefs, we lose the unity and the connectedness with the Creator that we're designed for. Yeshua speaks about, I am the Father. We're what? We're connected. We're in there. And, Miltha, the first one to wake up in this culture. Let's wake up. Let's become who we are and express as the truth of this human life, love. And when one starts to actually engage in forgiveness, what they thought they were begins to collapse. And that, until someone builds the brain cells for where they're going with that, that is terror personified. And so it takes time for people to hang around long enough to get, all I'm doing is collapsing the non-being self so that the truth of who I am can show up in my physiology and in my world. It's really pretty simple.
You know what it's got me thinking about? I'm thinking about before Lucinda, our first daughter, who's going to be 15 in May, before she was born, I remember it was only about maybe a week before she was born, a guy that I worked with down in Florida, a friend of mine named Phil, who was this New York cop that his voice sounded remarkably like the anteater from Pink Panther. Oh, what are you doing there, And he was Italian, of course, which meant that if he were to hold his hands behind his back, he would go mute and he couldn't speak. At least that was the joke I made. But Phil, he pulled me to the side one day, about just a few days before Lucinda was born, and he's like, Dale, he's like, being a father, he's like, I realize that there's some things that I can say to you right now that you will have no comprehension of, but once this little girl comes into the world and you look on her face, he's like, from that point on, we're going to be able to have conversations that right now we can't have, because you really aren't going to be able to comprehend that. And it's amazing. I remember in that moment seeing my first child in that present moment, and I was keenly aware of Phil, and I went back the next day with pictures of the baby and like a T-shirt that had her footprints on it, and I pulled Phil to the side, and I had tears in my eyes, and I said, you know what? I know what you mean now. He said, I knew you would. And it was just an amazing experience. You don't know until you wake up. You don't realize it. Exactly what Yeshua said. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's an amazing process, the awakening, and you don't realize it until you wake up.
Now, sleeping can't fathom until they have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And, of course, in some arena of our lives, we're all still asleep at some point, when that unconsciousness kicks in. And the opportunity to wake up is pretty amazing. Pretty cool. Well, let's check and see if Dr. Tim's got anything to share with us. How are you, sir?
So you're going to bring me back down out of the cloud, are you?
Down out of the cloud?
Let's go for it.
I was just in the flow here, just breathing and being with what you and Dale were talking about, and really, there aren't really words.
Sounds like human life.
Sounds like the birth of a child. That's the moment. It's exactly that. It's that essence.
I remember when Krista was born, my daughter. We birthed the children at home. And I actually had a class that evening. It was a Friday afternoon. And I had a weekend-long class. I had a classroom in my home. And there was a gentleman who had already left Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to drive to Atlanta to that class. And that was back before the day of cell phones, so there was no way to reach him to say, at 3:40 this afternoon, we had a baby. We're not going to start a class at 7. So there was no way to cancel the class, so we did the class. And I went down to teach the class. People did not believe me when I greeted them at the door with this little bundle under my arm that she had been born 3 hours before. No, go on. No, I couldn't be. Yeah, that's the way it worked. And then I went down to the class, and I literally could not think a thought. I couldn't. I knew my material. I couldn't think a thought. And it was like direct transmission that didn't get filtered through my mind. I was there to teach a topic, and the topic flowed without any participation from what I call me at all. Like, I was out of the picture. And I actually got about 10 minutes into that particular class, and I stopped the class and said, excuse me, I need to go and get a tape recorder. And I recorded it because I couldn't think. I couldn't think a thought. I couldn't think about what I was talking about. I couldn't remember what I was talking about. I just knew the topic, and bang, there it was out of my mouth. It's pretty awesome. So I hear you, Tim, and that's where our human lives begin. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have babies until we reach a certain level of maturity physiologically and immaturity spiritually. And then human life shows up in its purity, and it opens a space that is just beyond comprehensible. And that's
I remember
what the work's about.
I was going to say in the summer of '95, I remember you were doing the Circle of Life and how to play it workshop. And you probably remember this. Your dry erase board was, 4 miles long and about maybe 6 miles high. And I remember that when you did this particular workshop, I actually have photos of the dry erase board. A bunch of us, probably a dozen of us, walked up with cameras and were taking photos of the board because you hit this flow maybe 25, 30 minutes into the workshop, and you were like the cosmos were speaking through you. And I remember people, we were crying. There was, we had lumps in our throat. It was this amazing, profound experience, and your hands were moving so fast on that dry erase board, writing this down. It was just one of the most poignant or even almost dramatic experiences I had had up to that point, other than maybe that first experience of doing the first week's worksheet at the Why Again workshop. It was the most profound experience up to that point of being around Heartland. And although my first worksheet was pre-Heartland, but I'll remember that forever. And that essence is what I don't seek necessarily with my work, but I let go so that it opens up, and I realize that it's about the presence. It's about that conscious, active, present love. It's not even about the words that I'm saying. It's about that energy and the essence. And it happens all the time with me where that's when I realized something was happening. It was 7 or 8 years ago. I was doing, you remember Mystic Journeys bookstore in Asheville, and I realized after, doing lots of events there that after a while, all of a sudden, every Tuesday, people were showing up with recording devices, video cameras, and there was literally audio recorders and little micro cassette recorders that people would sit on chairs around me. And that's when I realized something was up, because I'd get to the end of the 2 hours and I wouldn't remember almost anything that I said. But I knew what that presence was. I knew what the flow feels like. That's why I say, that's why I've said it over and over on this show, that's why I sit in the back of your events. It's not to not be seen. It's because I'm like almost sitting on my hands, because there's so much energy that courses through me when I'm in the room, when you're doing your process, that it's like part of me wants to stand up on the top of my chair and like scream at the top of my lungs, "Oh my God, you hear what he's saying?" It's just an awesome experience.
And it's an experience that the intellectual mind, the non-being mind, wants to capture, and it's not capable of capturing it. It's totally, completely, absolutely impossible. And that's why, Yeshua says it in many different ways, trying to get the point across to those without ears and without eyes, that have eyes and ears, when he says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. This self, this non-being self that's telling you the stories based in hostility or fear, has to die, has to shut up in order for the true self to live. And that non-being self can't comprehend that. It's not comprehensible in any way, shape, or form. And, hence I oftentimes will throw the tongue-in-cheek line is, you've got to be out of your mind. You've got to drop that thing.
That gets me thinking about in the gospel.
The mind, they're hidden by the mind. Excuse me, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying in John 1:5 it says, we know it from the King James as the light shines through the darkness, and the darkness cannot comprehend the light or overtake it. And in Aramaic, what that really means is that the light, that light of presence shines through the shadows, and that or the unconsciousness, and that unconsciousness cannot comprehend, overtake, or master that light. It just doesn't happen. You don't. If you've got a dark room and you need to, you want to have light, you don't push darkness out of the room. It doesn't work. What do? You turn on the light, and that's the one. If there's any, thing that I have about a lot of New Thought philosophies is they think that you can just somehow try pushing the dark out and say that it's not there, and somehow the darkness goes away. But in fact, the only way the darkness goes away is for you to put the light of presence on it and look directly at it and own it. Like I say, you eat it. You take responsibility. You hold it up, and it's actually in the act of embracing and acknowledging it. That's when it vanishes and you realize it wasn't real in the first place. You don't get rid of darkness by saying it's not there or by trying to push it out of the room. You get rid of darkness by just being conscious. And as a matter of fact, Carl Jung said, I think I'm paraphrasing, he said one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. One becomes enlightened by making the darkness conscious. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Flooding it with being. Great line in the Course in Miracles. And back into this, you must bring the world you do not want to the one you do. And of course, you've got to be living in the world that you do want, human life, this awesome, active, physiological presence of love. And then, if there's anything in physiology that does not belong there, you must be willing to bring that world directly to the presence of love. And it's the forgiveness process that allows the uncovering of that which you do not want. And what the non-being world does is it's got a whole story based on the internal darkness about how that darkness is caused by somebody else. And then the Greeks come along telling, well, all you do is forgive them. You just keep letting them off the hook, as though that's got anything whatsoever to do with the teachings. As opposed to, if I'm in someone's presence and I'm experiencing darkness, that is, there's some form of hostility or fear in me, and I forgive, then I will remove my darkness. It doesn't have anything to do with the person who shows me my darkness, except that this person is the gift and the catalyst that shows me my darkness. And when I choose to be responsible for it, then by forgiving, by engaging in the actual forgiveness process as it was taught 2,000 years ago, first century Aramaic forgiveness, I will collapse the pictures my mind is showing me. I will be able to access directly that which is pain in me, that which does not belong in me, and by exposure to the active presence of love, it dissolves. Then and only then have I forgiven. The non-being mind makes up this whole story. Well, you just let everybody off the hook. You just forgive them. And it's like, it's universal today. It's universal. We're starting to learn Spanish, and in the Spanish language, forgive is pardon. I'm going to pardon you. And if somebody does something crazy, it's nice to pardon them. That's a nice action to do, but that's got nothing to do with forgiveness. If someone does something crazy and they bring up my crazy, I may choose to pardon them, and then if I'm going to ever be free of my own craziness, I'm going to have to apply forgiveness, the removal of my craziness, and to recognize that my craziness is all about me. And I mean, literally, for centuries on the planet, pretty much every culture on the planet has taught us that your pain and your insanity is about somebody else and caused by them, and all you have to do is kill them, get rid of them, make war on them, and then everything will be okay. Or you just let them off the hook, and then everything will be okay. But letting somebody off the hook does nothing to change your darkness. Applying forgiveness changes your darkness. And when people first start to hear that, they are so much rage comes up. We had a gentleman on the show the other day, and as we started to feed back, you're moving in a direction that's not truth. You're moving in a direction. Notice how hostile your words were. And all he could do was go to his story about how great he was, and it was a derogatory comment made about women. And so I called him on it. And I mean, he went off on me, and he didn't want to talk to me anymore. He wanted to go back to that woman, Jeanie, and talk to her. He didn't want anything to do with somebody who's going to confront him on his stuff. But each of us needs to learn to confront our own darkness, the hostility and fear in us. And it's kind of like the good news and the bad news. When I realize that it's mine, I can confront it and I can remove it. That's the good news. The bad news is it's always mine. If I'm feeling it, it's always mine. My mind shows me pictures about how it's all about somebody else, but until I forgive and collapse my pictures and bring my own darkness to the light, I'm in trouble.
Absolutely. Well, now we're almost at the end already. What's this? How does this happen so quick every week? It happens fast. It moves fast.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
So we've got about 4 minutes left. Dr. Tim, anything to add, or should we check and see if there's anybody on the phone? See if we can take a quick call.
Well, I was just going to say to Dale that it really clicked in at a new level for me when he was talking about the definition of faith acting from the rooted center of being, so the acting from that space, and then the idea of the prophet being that clear channel. And since you said that, and of course I've said on the show here, I've listened to that show 3 or 4 times now, and it's just sinking in at a deeper level. And I'm making it more of a practice to be shown what to do in each moment, day in and day out, and it's making a huge difference in my experience day to day.
That's awesome to hear that. You hit it exactly. you got it exactly on the bullseye, which is, yeah, when you live in faith, you are a prophet. And everyone, when they live at that level, coming from the rooted center, they are a prophet. Prophets don't just exist in the Old Testament, they're now.
Absolutely. And, one of the thoughts, Dr. Tim, is that maybe we can talk to Unity there and get Dale up in that direction, too, to do a series. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mentioned it to Reverend Tom this past Sunday, and he also mentioned that he hadn't heard back from you about an October date. So we have to clear that up because he's holding the space on his schedule for that.
Yes. Last time we talked about that, you were going to send me an email, and I don't believe I've received it.
You and your emails. Okay. I'll resend it.
What can I say?
I will resend it.
Okay. I'm on right now, so I'll get it if it enters in. I'm at the point where I've got just over 57,000 emails in my inbox, so forgive me if I don't catch up with everything.
I can't remove you.
Thank you. Well, let's just do a quick check and see if there are any callers. Michelle. Or maybe Michelle's got something to share with us.
Well, I enjoyed your talk, Dale. This is Michelle Pichet, and we met on Skype December. When you were talking about only God, it made me think that God is everything, in the Native American proverb that no tree has branches so foolish as to fight amongst themselves. And
Absolutely.
I'm sitting here just kind of like Dr. Tim, just simmering and taking it in. And I appreciate your gifts to the show. And Dr. Ryce, we've got 1 minute.
It's a good thing to be out of your mind, isn't it?
No,
and yet
very,
we are
very
down to. It is a good thing to be out of your mind, and we're down to the last minute or so. So I'm just going to say, if you want to access Dale's materials, www.daleallenhoffman.com. You can get on his mailing list. He's got videos and audios and just all kinds of stuff happening on YouTube. If you just put in Dale Aramaic, you'll come up. I think you're number one on the list there, Dale, on Google, if you do that.
Yeah, it's right at the top.
And, of course, if you're ready for Costa Rica, March the 7th through the 15th, 9-day Why Is This Happening to Me Again Codependence Intensive. Heartland schedule is on the website. Give the world the best gift that you can possibly give them. Have the best year yet of your eternal life. Dale, we appreciate you. Hold you in a blessing.